I took Philosophy 101. Just a side note, that's the only philosophy class I took in college. I distinctly remember the professor asking our class a question that stumped us all. Can a person truly perform a selfless act? The professor spent an hour with our class as we debated, as we argued, and tried to convince her that there are truly selfless acts. Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Jesus. I now recognize years later that our professor was introducing our class as freshmen to a Socratic method of teaching where she first showed us how little we truly knew in order to begin teaching us from the very beginning without any assumptions. In every case, she pointed out how the people we argued for were in fact doing things that served their personal interests. Their acts may have benefited others, and for many have been that did greater things than just for themselves. But all actions we listed benefited the individual in at least one way or another. At the time, and I confess to you even this morning, I wrestle with this question. Are there any truly selfless acts? When people are benevolent, but it makes them feel good. When you give blood, it helps someone who is unknown to you. But giving the gift that helps us feel better is a part of who we are. When you pick up a wallet of someone who leaves it behind in a shopping cart, you've done a good deed. But I certainly hope for myself that if I were to do that someone would do it for me maybe someday later. So why do I do the things that are nice? Why do you do things that are nice? There are a lot of good answers, but many people may say this: it is our responsibility to do the right thing. But is this a biblical idea? Are Christians called to be nice? Is that a part of our discipleship? And of course, the next question then has to be, can a person be a Christian and not be a good person? The truth is, there is no quick answer, because what we believe is what we call grace. And if God's grace is what we believe it is, then it changes you from the inside out, and the fruits of the Spirit, they spill out from your heart. However, it's not my place to judge whether a person is a Christian or not. As you heard me say last week, our faith is not an exclusive club. Being good is not a measuring stick to judge faithfulness of a person. I'd like to share one of the stories that you've sent me this last couple of months. There was a church bake sale, and a woman was purchasing a loaf of zucchini bread. The person in line behind her said, "Oh, you got that last loaf. I was about to purchase that." So the woman who had just purchased the bread said, "Here, you can have it. I was going to bake some later anyway." And the woman behind her said, "Oh, gee, thanks. That was really Christian of you." And the woman who gave it to her said, "That's nice, but I'm Jewish." The person who wrote me this story said, "Christians get it wrong when we think we have the corner on the market of kindness and charity." Being kind and providing acts of charity is not exclusive to Christianity, just as seeking to end injustice in our world wasn't either. Christians get it right when we realize that being the nicest, being the kindest, being the person that everyone looks to as the moral compass, maybe, is not ultimately the goal at all. We begin to get it right when we love and serve others because we're called to be witnesses to the love of Christ given on the cross and manifested as forgiveness and grace that is deeper, that is wider, and that is far more powerful than you and I can begin to imagine. Friends, you can join any number of community groups who are dedicated to doing good deeds. And in fact, as I look around, I know that many of you are doing great things. However, what we do this morning, what we're called to be as a people of faith, is not to be a social club. We are here because we have faith. We know that the love of God that offers peace on earth must be witnessed to all people. But as I stated, the fruits of the Spirit are the results of Christians gathered together. While it's not what defines us, charity and justice are ways that we honor God, and we honor God in one another. So what's the difference between acts of charity and justice? Both are important parts of the life of the church, but they're not interchangeable. I want to focus on these two for just a few moments. David Hilfiker spent most of his career as a physician with low-income people in both rural Minnesota and inner-city Washington, D.C. He is currently the financial director for Joseph's House, which is a 10-bed home and community for formerly homeless men who live with AIDS. He has written several books and articles about justice, about poverty, and about faith. And one article he wrote that I'm going to cite this morning is called "The Limits of Charity." Listen to his very poignant remarks. "I've begun to see some of the side effects to the kind of work that I do, and they concern the important difference between justice and charity. Justice has to do with fairness, with what people deserve. It results from the social structures that guarantee moral rights. Charity has to do with benevolence or generosity. It results from people's goodwill and can be withdrawn anytime they choose. To put the question more bluntly, do our works of charity impede the realization of justice in our society?" He goes on to say that in her book, Sweet Charity, sociologist Janet Poppendieck writes that the acts of charity, they act as a sort of moral safety valve. It reduces the discomfort evoked by visible destitution in our midst by creating the illusion of effective action and offers us a myriad ways of participating in it. It creates a culture of charity that normalizes and legitimates personal generosity in response to injustice. So let me pause here and clarify a few of these points. Acts of charity, in my opinion, are critical now more than they ever have been. According to the last census data, more than 7% of Bothell residents live below the poverty level. Please remember that these statistics that are gathered, they don't include people who are without homes, they don't include people who are in transition, or those who live out of their vehicles, which that number is rising beyond our count. So the actual percentage of 7%, I'm sure, is much higher than that. Our Bothell Community Kitchen does an amazing job of providing fellowship and a community meal for anyone who wants to join. And our church budget is planned in such a way that we can help individuals and families who need gas, rent, medical needs, and other things that you and I consider to be basic necessities of life. These are the immediate needs of our community, and those needs must be addressed. Our church, HopeLink, North Shore Baby Corner, and other nonprofits do amazing work to help to address these immediate needs of people. Acts of mercy, acts of charity, they truly do matter. Lives need to be sustained and saved. But Hilfiker's question is poignant and it haunts me. Do works of charity impede the realization of justice in our society? Are we creating a culture that normalizes the injustice happening in our communities that can neatly tuck aside these critical issues? So I started to think about it and reflect upon my own work, my own life. How many times does helping with a walk or volunteering make us feel like we're just doing our part? Or to put it another way, does chipping in enough? Well, yes, chipping in and doing acts of charity is enough, but it's only part of our responsibility. As we heard in the gospel message from Whitney this morning, serving the poor, the naked, and the sick is what we're asked to do. And acts of charity is a part of our calling. I'm sure you might have read this book written by Greg Mortensen. It's called 3 Cups of Tea. Anybody read it? Mortensen was asked by somebody if he could really change the lives of young children in Pakistan by building schools one at a time. And this was his response. He said, "What we're trying to do may just be a drop from the ocean." But the ocean would be less because of that missing drop. Mortensen knows that there are moments when one less drop is worth all the effort. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. And then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison, and when did we visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of the members of my family, you did it to me. As long as there are people in need, mercy and charity are what we should do whenever possible, but justice should always be our ultimate goal. Justice should be our goal. As Hilfiger writes, he says this about the homeless, AIDS, and hunger. These are just symptoms to the real problem, he says, and the real problem is injustice. Injustice is deep-seated. It is the inevitable result of the structures of our society, economic, governmental, social, and religious, that undergirds inequality. The way things stand now, he says, poverty is built into the systems we live in. Acts of charity can make us look and feel good about ourselves. But the work of fighting injustice, there is very little attractive about it. Micah 6:8 is one of the most famous verses in all of the Old Testament, particularly having to do with our calling as a people of faith. The 8th century prophet Micah foretold that the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. He also prophesied about the future destruction of Jerusalem and Samaria. He was the first prophet to predict the downfall of Jerusalem, a rich and great city in his time. But the local businesses and government were dishonest, and because of their dishonesty, because of their injustice, the innocent suffered. The verse you read this morning that was read by Whitney was about Micah prophesying to the people who in their corrupt ways were hurting their people. He has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. Seeking to end the injustices of the world isn't an option that we get to exercise whenever it's convenient. It's a part of our calling. It's a part of our responsibility. And when we do, when we begin to understand that we live in a world that we're called to seek to end injustice, that's when you and I begin to get things right. If the problem is injustice, then what we're about to celebrate this morning as we break the bread and drink from the cup of grace, it reminds us that there will be a day when all injustice will end. There will be a day when all stomachs are fed, when children do not need to go to bed at night for fear of what may happen when the lights go out, when health care, when acts of injustice through no fault of their own no longer happen. A table, the communion table, that is temporary because we worship a God who offers us something eternal. If the problem is injustice, then the communion table reminds us that there will be a day when injustice will end. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. We are called to seek God's kingdom here on earth. My prayer for you is this: may you begin to see the world that God has created as a place that we are all responsible. May your acts of charity, your moments of kindness, the grace and generosity that you so freely give to those who you love, to those who are the stranger and the lost and the least, may we together take up the mantle to battle injustice in our communities, in our world, in our country, and everywhere that we walk and talk, not as a choice, but as our responsibility. May we do this together. May we do this with the hope and comfort and joy, knowing that we do this out of the freedom that God gives us so richly. May we take our acts of mercy and not let it be the end, but the beginning of a time and a place where all are fed, all are clothed, all have a place to know that they are safe. May it begin with us. Amen.